Canada is quietly gaining control of something America cannot grow food without, and almost nobody sees it coming. While this gives Canada more power, it puts American farms in a difficult spot that could change the future of food. The real reason goes much deeper than politics, and it cannot be easily changed. A change is unfolding that most Americans have not noticed yet, and it touches something every American farmer depends on to grow food. Prime Minister Mark Carney's government is now part of a structural shift affecting potash, a fertilizer ingredient most consumers never think about, sitting quietly behind every field of corn, wheat, soybeans, and vegetables grown across the United States. Without it, crop yields collapse. With it, American agriculture produces at the scale that feeds the country and exports to the world. The supply of it is tightening. And the reason traces directly back to a geological fact that no trade policy can change. The United States does not have enough potash. It never has. Small domestic mining operations exist in Utah, New Mexico, and Michigan. But industry experts have documented for decades that these facilities produce lower quality ore and cannot come close to meeting national demand at scale. According to the U.S. Geological Survey, Canada holds potash reserves nearly 5 times larger than those in the United States. Canada's scale of potash mining by production volume is 36 times larger than American output. This dependency is not a recent development and not a consequence of any particular trade policy. It is a function of geology. The deposits exist in Saskatchewan and nowhere else accessible to American buyers at comparable cost and scale. Canada supplied approximately 85% of U.S. potash imports in 2024, according to the Fertilizer Institute, which represents the American fertilizer industry. That figure rises to nearly 90% under other industry measurement methods, depending on how import volumes are calculated across different time periods. The alternative suppliers, Belarus and Russia, are not viable options given the geopolitical sanctions and trade restrictions that have defined both countries' international relationships since 2022. Canada does not compete for this market. It occupies it by default because the deposits exist only in Saskatchewan. The scale behind that dominance is documented in specific production figures. Canada accounted for more than 32% of global potash production in 2023 and over 41% of global exports. Saskatchewan's 11 active mines produced an estimated 21.9 million metric tons of potash in 2023. Nutrien, the world's largest single potash producer and exporter, owns 6 of those active Saskatchewan mines and sold more than 14.4 million metric tons of potash in 2024 alone, delivering to more than 40 countries worldwide. Canada's total potash reserves stand at approximately 1.1 billion tons in potassium oxide equivalent, according to Natural Resources Canada. The tariff sequence that introduced acute cost pressure into this supply relationship began in February 2025, when the Trump administration imposed a 25% tariff on Canadian fertilizer imports. American farm groups and industry associations pushed back immediately. The rate was subsequently reduced to 10% following that pressure. But even at 10%, the cost pass-through across a supply chain this large is not abstract. Potash prices were sitting around $450 per ton, according to Illinois production cost figures from early 2025. A full pass-through of a 25% tariff would have added more than $100 per ton to Canadian source supply. At 10%, the addition is smaller, but it still compounds across the volumes American farmers require for a single planting season. Josh Linville, Vice President Fertilizer at StoneX, described the supply dynamic precisely. Unlike some other tariff goods, where the exporting country absorbs part of the cost increase, potash exports operate differently. Canada holds the leverage in this supply relationship because domestic U.S. production cannot fill the gap. The structure is not subject to negotiation on the American side. There are no alternative suppliers at scale, no domestic mines ready to expand production quickly, and no substitute input that agronomists have identified as a functional replacement for potash in high-yield crop production. Bob Thompson, president of the Michigan Farmers Union, stated the farm-level consequence directly. Any added costs from tariffs are passed down to individual farmers, and farmers have no mechanism to recover those costs because crop prices are set by markets, not by producers. Bill Knudsen, a professor at the Michigan State Department of Agricultural, Food, and Resource Economics, said tariffs push potash prices up and farm profits down, noting that virtually every major crop uses potash in some form. American agriculture was already entering the 2025 and 2026 seasons with declining farm income, particularly for field crop producers facing a third consecutive year of depressed corn prices. Corn farmers are operating with severely compressed margins. Fertilizer represents 45% of operating expenses for U.S. corn farmers specifically, and between 30 and 45% of annual operating costs for farmers across other commodity categories. When the single largest cost input becomes more expensive through a policy mechanism rather than through ordinary market supply and demand, the adjustment is absorbed entirely at the farm level. The U.S. import price index for chemical fertilizers rose from 164.5 in December 2024 to 186.5 in September 2025, a 14-month increase that was not driven by global supply shortages or weather events. It was driven directly by the tariff structure applied to the country's primary external supplier of a product the domestic industry cannot replace. The Fertilizer Institute has formally urged the administration to grant exemptions for Canadian potash specifically, characterizing it as critical to American agriculture. Nutrien itself warned that any new tariff increases would raise costs for American farmers, with no compensating supply alternative available in the short or medium term. In December 2025, Trump indicated he was considering imposing severe new tariffs on Canadian fertilizer imports as part of a broader strategy to incentivize domestic U.S. fertilizer production. The United States Department of Agriculture announced a plan to reshore fertilizer manufacturing. Industry groups responded that supply risks remain substantial regardless of domestic production targets because the infrastructure timeline for new potash mines does not align with the agricultural calendar. A proposed potash mine in Osceola County, Michigan represents the most concrete near-term option for expanding U.S. domestic production. It could eventually produce 800,000 tons of potash per year. It depends on a $1.1 billion federal loan that received conditional approval in January 2025. Even if that financing is finalized and construction proceeds without delay, new mines require many years of development before reaching production capacity capable of meaningfully reducing import dependence. The gap between policy ambition and operational reality in potash mining is measured in years, not months. Joe Jansen, an agricultural economist at the University of Illinois, added the structural counterargument to the domestic production strategy. Any expansion of U.S. fertilizer output driven by tariff protection means producers are being shielded from cheaper foreign competition. For farmers buying domestically produced potash, the price advantage of Canadian supply disappears and is replaced by domestically priced product at a premium. The farmer pays more, regardless of whether the potash came from Saskatchewan or Michigan. The tariff does not reduce farmer cost. It shifts who captures the margin.